Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 384. Today, my guest is Misty Winston. Misty, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's always good to be here.
Yeah, very good to have you on. You're a fan favorite. Every time you're on, people are like, "Oh, great, Misty's back. We're excited." Although
Yay.
today, this is a little bit more personal for you. You,
Yeah,
are pretty public. You're from Ohio. I don't know, Ohioite or Ohioan or whatever you want to say.
Ohioan. Yes,
Okay.
Ohioan.
So other than, playing a big role in the election every couple of years, I think you're more or less known as like a Rust Belt kind of state. Maybe not quite like Gary, Indiana level, but maybe a state that struggles a little bit economically. But there was a major event in a place in Ohio called East Palestine, which is the only reason I was aware of this situation at all, is I saw Palestine was trending on Twitter, and I was like, well, I gotta click on it because I assume I'm gonna read some horrible thing about another raid on the Gen and refugee camp. But what I ended up reading was actually pretty horrific and looked really bad. So, Misty, I'll let you go ahead and give us whatever kind of details you want, and then I'll think of any questions that we need to ask to follow up to make it clear for anybody who isn't aware, because other until probably what, Monday the 13th, so like 10 days after this happened, there's been almost no coverage. Yesterday
Yeah.
I did read some mainstream articles at least like dipping their toes into this though, but go
Yeah.
ahead.
It's starting to trickle out a little bit. I think it's to the point now where it's so big, it's difficult for them to continue to ignore it. So for people who may not be aware, on February 3rd, which if you're on Twitter, it has been on Twitter a lot. People are talking about it. The people are talking about it. Mainstream media is ignoring it entirely. So on February 3rd, there was a massive train derailment and explosion. Norfolk Southern is the railway, and it's really bad. So at least 5 cars were carrying some really nasty chemicals, and there was a major explosion, like I said, and then they were kind of in a tricky situation. The stuff was already leaking, and so they decided that the best way to handle it was to burn it off. But there's a lot of issues with that. And again, we don't even really know exactly what's going down. I'm not sure that we know for sure all of the chemicals that are involved here. I know that we know of a few. One of them is vinyl chloride, which is a nasty little thing. It's a monomer that it's used to make PVC. And I have notes here because I'm not scientifically literate really at all. So I want to make sure I give you accurate information. This is a chemical that boils at 8 degrees Fahrenheit. So when this started leaking, obviously, and then was on fire, and not only was it leaking the fluid, but then it was also leaking, or was leaking boiling liquid. And so millions of pounds of this chemical was spilling into the ground and boiling off into the air. So one of the big things with this particular chemical is that a byproduct of burning this is hydrogen chloride. And hydrogen chloride latches onto water particles, including water vapor in the atmosphere, which then turns into hydrochloric acid. So while burning, they claim that this burning it off, that process was like this huge success. They're not telling people that there is now potentially hundreds of thousands of pounds of acid in the air. So that's not good. There's also some reports that there's now trace evidence of this stuff as far as the Ohio River, which is the water source for 5 million people. It also feeds into the Mississippi. Ohio and Pennsylvania are fertile farmland. So this stuff is now in the air, the water, the soil. People's lives have been completely upended. And they're claiming now that everything's fine, guys. You can go back to your houses. Everything's cool. I don't know why anyone would believe them. These are known liars. It's really bad. It's a really scary situation. I'm about 180 miles west of it. So I have a fair bit of distance from it. But I mean, really, the entirety of Ohio and Pennsylvania, and even parts of like West Virginia and Kentucky, are in real danger of some really nasty stuff happening.
Right. And as you mentioned, with like the river and water networks and everything like that, this could spread fairly quickly. So yeah, I guess one of the things that I had picked up was that it was evaporating into the air, and that's apparently the reason they decided to set it on fire. Although it seemed like the decision happened fairly quickly, and wondering what other kind of chemicals were in the other rail cars that were involved in the derailment and all of that, and what kind of, combinations that you now have of all these things looking as if they're burning together from the videos. I mean, this looks horrific. One of the one of the hashtags, and maybe this takes it too far. We don't know yet, but I think they're calling it Ohio's Chernobyl,
Yeah.
and comparing to the event that happened in Ukraine under the Soviet Union with the power plant explosion. I don't know if that's, but looking from the videos and some of the pictures that you see, I mean, this does look really horrific.
It's really bad. I mean, animals are dying like crazy. There's fish that are coming up dying in rivers, miles and miles and miles away. Chickens are dying. Family pets are dying. A guy who raises foxes, his foxes are getting sick and dying. People in the area are complaining about eye, ear, nose, and throat irritation, headaches, skin irritation, all of that good stuff. I know that a couple of these chemicals are known carcinogens, so I think that really we're probably not going to know the full impacts of this stuff for like 5, 10, 15, 50 years from now. And they're desperately trying to cover it up, which I think to me is what makes me the most nervous, is the idea that mainstream media is desperately trying to avoid the situation, and they're actually arresting journalists who are trying to cover it. So that's never a good sign.
Yeah, I do want to mention, and before we get to the journalist part, because I want to ask you about that next, but I read an article in the New Republic this morning, which sometimes is questionable as a source, but this was absolutely fantastic. They went on the ground, interviewed a bunch of the 5,000 people that live in East Palestine, Ohio, and asked them, hey, how's it going? And the people were saying, well, the rail line is offering each of the 5,000, I don't even know if it's the 5,000 people, I think it's each of the homes, $1,000.
Yeah.
And so
it started with $5 a person. That's what they started with. They were just going to give them $5
So
a
now it's
person.
$1,000
You can't even buy a
household.
Big Mac meal with
Right.
$5.
I mean, so, I recently drove, I was living in Colorado. Now I'm out here in Boston. So I drove past this area of the country, and I know that hotel rooms in this area of the country are 150. If you want to, like, if you got kids, you probably don't want to go like too low quality, right? You want it to be like nice-ish. You're going to be spending $150, $200 a night. This doesn't even cover a week's hostel stay. But one of the crazy things to me, Misty, was that, the rail line is being pretty, they're demanding a lot of documentation to make people get this money. And I'm sure, for a lot of people, maybe they got a few $1,000s in the bank, but, they don't have enough money that they could leave their house for an entire week, live in a hotel, and still, make ends meet, because you can't cook, you're eating out every night. And I'm sure like there's a lot of other things that you're like spending a little bit of money on here and there when you have kids, to try not to have the kids like freak out and, make it a little bit of a funner experience rather than like this miserable, awful thing that's happening to you.
Yeah.
So there's nowhere near enough money going to these
No,
families.
especially for a company that's raking in gazillions of dollars in profit every year, right? I mean,
Right.
and then they had a town hall meeting. Mike DeWine showed up. They didn't even send a representative. They like just some worker dude. Like it wasn't even like a corporate representative. They just sent out some rank and file worker to answer questions that the people had. That's disgusting. You just blew up their town. I mean, the least you could do is send somebody to answer questions and be accountable to this. But they're never going to be accountable for this, because there's never accountability for stuff like this, right? I mean, they literally just blew up a town. We just saw the strike situation right before Christmas. This is all about, hazardous working conditions, overworked employees, all of that stuff that they were fighting for just before Christmas. And then we have something like this happen, and there's going to be, they'll have to pay some measly fine, which will be like a drop in the bucket based off their profits. And in fact, I think most corporations at this point, that's kind of in their business model. Like they plan for this kind of stuff now. They're like, yeah, eventually something's going to happen where we're going to have to pay some fines for killing people. So let's go ahead and plan for that. And it won't even be a drop in the bucket for them. They'll continue business as usual, and they'll never see jail or anything like that. But if you're caught with a joint, right, you go to jail. But these guys are never going to see a second in jail. It's really despicable. And the people of this tiny town, I mean, it's like 5,000 people, are just being hung out to dry. I mean, there's going to be no accountability. They can't even get straight answers. They don't even really know what's happening. Nobody will answer their questions for them. Everybody's being very vague. And this is literally their lives you're playing with. I mean, this is literally their health. And especially when people are seeing the fish that are dying off, the pets that are dying off, why you want to take your kids back into that environment? I wouldn't. But where are they going to go? I mean, this is not like a wealthy area. They're not going to, these people don't have the money to just pick up and move on the drop of a dime and completely relocate their lives. So yeah, it's very frustrating to see that this kind of a thing is happening right after they just prevented these workers from striking for better working conditions. It's crazy.
Yeah, so the last part of what I was going to add was that the railway was demanding so much documentation, people are having to go back into their houses. And
Yeah.
that's how they were getting exposed and know, like, hey, every time I go to my house and spend 15, 20 minutes in East Palestine, I have, I break out in a rash, I have trouble breathing, my throat burns, my eyes burn. These are, and they're saying that if this is happening now and if fish are dying now, what's going to happen to me in say 20 years? And people are like rushing out to get health checks and cancer screens, that way in 20 years they could come back and say no, that the reason I
Officials
have
are
this is because
telling
of you.
people to
Yeah.
do that. They're like, hey, you should go get a health assessment now so that we can monitor how bad this is going to mess you up in 20 years. I mean, they're literally telling people that this is something that could potentially happen. And we all know that these are nasty chemicals. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, this is some really gross stuff that's now in the soil, in the water, in the air, in the environment, in the atmosphere. And these people have to go back and live there now, potentially. And again, like I said, this is not just restricted to just this tiny town of East Palestine. It's now potentially in the Ohio River, which then feeds into the Mississippi. I mean, this is a big deal. This could potentially impact the agriculture in this country tremendously for decades. I mean, we don't really know the full ramifications of it yet because again, we can't even get straight answers from these people. So I don't know that we're ever going to know the full extent of it. But it's a really scary situation. And again, the idea that we can't even get straight answers. They're arresting journalists. They're trying to cover this up. That really doesn't lend a lot of, it doesn't make me feel very good about it for sure.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And then one of the other things that this is, again, you point out a company that has billions of dollars and everything like that. Apparently a woman who had a sick cat had a note from her vet saying that the cat is sick because of the chemicals, and they say, well, we'll get back to you in a little bit, which that's really not how vets work, right? Like, they're not going to
No.
provide the care for free. You're either going to pay them or they're going to put the cat down. And so they had, the cat got put down because she couldn't afford the care, which sad story.
Yes.
But these stories are going to happen a lot. Now I want to move on and talk about the journalist situation, because early on there seemed to be one person interested in covering this, and he got arrested. And so what happened here, Misty?
Yeah, so a guy from News Nation, which, I mean, they do some good stuff. I mean, they hired Chris Cuomo, so they're not great, but they do some good stuff on some things. And so a guy from News Nation went to the press conference, and he was doing a live report during the press conference. So he was doing a live report in the back of the room as the press conference is going on. And apparently they got mad at him because he was being too loud or something, disrupting the press conference, which he couldn't have been, because Mike DeWine claims that he didn't even know what was happening. He didn't know that there was a situation. He said he heard like there was some tussling going on in the back of the room, but it couldn't have been that bad, because Mike DeWine didn't even notice that something was going on until there was, an arrest happening. But yeah, the cops came and arrested a journalist for doing journalism, which, if you know me, that is my hot button. That's not good. That's exactly what I've been warning about for years. First they came for Assange, and we've all been saying in the in those spaces that once they came for Assange and they were able to do to him what they're doing to him, it was going to make it that much easier for them to start going after other journalists. And we've seen that play out over the last few years. And a journalist getting arrested for simply doing his job on a massive environmental disaster that's not good news.
Right. I want to ask, how's the coverage been in Ohio? Because I know that, local media is a little bit different where, there are these things that go on in the country. Like, I'm from St. Louis, so I know that there's nuclear waste burning under the city of St. Louis that, nobody really talks about outside of St. Louis, but occasionally it makes the news there and you think, oh, wow, this is going to be a big national story that everybody cares about. No, that's not the case. Or like, the cancer spraying, they sprayed all the carcinogens in St. Louis for years and years to see how cancer affected black versus white people because the city was like segregated in certain ways. And yeah, like those stories just don't make the national media. So how's the coverage been in Ohio? Is it any better? Do they seem to care more on the local media?
They're covering it. I don't know necessarily that they care more. They are covering it. Again, I'm in the Columbus metro area, so our coverage isn't as extensive. I do know that in the I don't know what they're probably. I don't know. It's probably the Pennsylvania. I don't know.
Oh yeah, it's pretty close to Pittsburgh, right?
It's very close to it's, I mean, I don't know, maybe, I'm not sure, maybe like an hour even. It's like East Palestine's right on the border of Ohio and Pennsylvania. So yeah, I do know that there has been some pretty regular coverage of it in the local area. In my area, there's been some decent coverage. I mean, it's in my opinion, it should be the top story every day, and people should be talking about this on a regular basis. It should be national news. It should be the topic of conversation on every major network, at least, a little bit. It should at least get some coverage. That's what's very weird, is that mainstream media isn't talking about it at all. Like you said, there's been some trickling out of some stories, but for the most part, they're not really talking about it. So local coverage has been better. I mean, as I mentioned, when I said that the health officials are telling people to get health screenings, I saw that on a local news station from that area. So they are trying to inform the people. They're trying to get the story out. But even local media is fairly corrupted. I mean, they really just kind of repeat whatever is given to them from, Norfolk Southern. And that's in every kind of situation like this. We see the same thing. Is we get Norfolk Southern will say what they want the narrative to be. Politicians will repeat it. The media repeats it. And so we're really only getting the story of the people who are responsible for the situation. So that's what's really troubling, is when they start arresting journalists, and when they start trying to cover this stuff up, and when they start trying to, they want to investigate themselves. Norfolk Southern wants to set up water collection and all of stuff so they can test it, and then they'll tell you that it's fine. That's just not good enough. There needs to be a third party who goes in there and tests the stuff for these people, because clearly Norfolk Southern cannot be trusted. So yeah, I mean, the media coverage has been, I wouldn't say it's stellar, but there is at least some coverage in the local area.
Yeah. And just for a third party, I wouldn't trust the EPA either.
No.
So if you live in the area or you're concerned at all, like, hire somebody and do it yourself. And hopefully, you find nothing and you end up paying for it and it costs you nothing. But if you find something, at least then you have evidence and
Which
how
sucks,
to proceed going forward. It does, but
that it's incumbent on the person who, again, this is not a wealthy area. So
Right.
for them to have to pay for something like that in order just to make sure that they're safe is really, really, really frustrating and infuriating. So yeah, I mean, as I keep telling people, we need to stand with these people. If you have money to donate, I know that there's some GoFundMes that are legit that are running around. If you have the money to donate a couple dollars to help them get through the situation, I'm sure that would be helpful. I don't really know what else we can do other than throwing money at it, because, we're not scientists. There's nothing that we can do to clean it up. It's done, right? It's done. The situation is what it is. So it really sucks that these people are put in that situation. And I mean, listen, I'm only 180 miles from it, so there's potentially ramifications for me here, and that makes me angry.
Absolutely. And look, one of the reasons I say don't trust the EPA is, the government was poisoning our soldiers in Hawaii with, they knew that the Red Hill had a major
Yes.
leak. It's a massive fuel storage tank. Diesel fuel leaked into the aquifers. And the children of soldiers were going to their schools and drinking diesel fuel water. All the water has shine to it. People are losing their hair, their sense of taste, a whole bunch of other major health issues in Hawaii.
And they've known for decades that that's happening, and it's still happening to this day. And there was the methane leak in California. Flint Flint, Michigan still doesn't really have clean water. I mean, and that's the case. Flint is definitely the most well-known situation like that, but their communities across the country are having that same exact situation happen to them. So yeah, we definitely cannot trust the government on this for sure. It's become very clear that they do not care. They will poison you. I mean, Agent Orange. I mean, come on. How many times do they get to do it before your sense of skepticism kicks in, right?
So, Misty, one of the most interesting things about this to me has been the reaction, at least, as far as you see from the mainstream media, which is nothing. And then on Twitter, which, if you look, the first elected representative I could find to tweet anything about this was Marjorie Taylor Greene, who isn't from Ohio,
no.
is a Republican, and, is oftentimes like saying things that are way out there. I'll go ahead and say that. I think she's right on some of the war issues, but sometimes she's way out there.
I mean, if we're being real, though, she's just using this as a political opportunity. It's politically advantageous for her to bring this up, to throw it in Joe Biden's face, to throw it in Pete Buttigieg's face. She can score political points on this. She doesn't care about the people of Ohio. Let's be very clear about that. She definitely does not. But it is very, very frustrating that Marjorie Taylor Greene is speaking on this before Little Miss Green New Deal or Bernie Sanders or, you know what I'm saying? Like I think yesterday, finally, 10 days in, Ilhan Omar and Jamal Bowman and maybe Rashida Tlaib started to like peek their head out and make very like tepid statements about it. But again, I think that honestly, the reason why that they're not speaking out is because they just stood in the way of the rail worker strike right before Christmas.
Right.
And
that's kind of where I was going, because to me, the top two like kind of national issues that come out of this are one, environmental, which is definitely left to center issue, and two, unions, which again would seemingly be a left to center issue.
It used to be.
And yet it's again Marjorie Taylor Greene, Pasibik, Chernovich, and all these people on Twitter are the ones making, the Libertarian Party Mises caucus account is tweeting about this before Nina Turner is, right? Like that's
and Nina
really
Turner's
interesting.
from Ohio, y'all. She did tweet about it.
She did, but
late.
Yes.
Very, very late.
She should be the one bringing it to everybody's attention is the way kind of her being from Ohio, being a progressive leader, having a very large social media following. She could have brought this to national attention, and it was the right that did. And, she's only now, and they're only now, and they're not even making a big deal out of it. It's not, like in any way, like they would protest, say Trump saying anything offensive or something like that. This is, just doesn't seem to be all that important to them.
No. And it's disgusting, because if this happened under Trump, dude, we would never hear the end of it. They would not shut up about it. I mean, AOC would be on her Twitter page every single day bringing it up. Nina Turner would be bringing it up every single day. And because it's under a Biden, this is what it just irritates me about partisan politics, is there is absolutely no consistency whatsoever. And you're right. And even Pete Buttigieg, he's like 10 days and then he's concerned. Really? That's what you got? And I think the day before he finally made a statement, he was at some event making jokes about balloons and saying, this is an exciting time for transportation. Well, yeah, Ohio is on fire. I'd say that's an exciting time. What are you talking about? I mean, what are you talking about? And so the idea that he wanted to further deregulate the stuff, and potentially cause more derailments, because derailments are going to continue. There's no question about it. This is going to continue to happen because for multitudes of reasons. The brake systems are completely outdated. They need to be upgraded. The inspection process is unbelievably shortened. Clyde Whitaker, who's a union rep, talked about how it used to be 3 minutes per car. They've dropped it to 90 seconds. The workers are completely overworked and underpaid. They're exhausted. I mean, this is going to continue to happen. And it's very frustrating to me that there's this complete inconsistent partisan nonsense happening about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I think I saw today there was actually another derailment in Houston or somewhere in Texas.
And another one in South Carolina.
Okay. So this, like you said, this is going to be something that, happens apparently going forward. Now, do you know much about the union situation? As a libertarian, I'm, kind of agnostic on unions. workers could get together and negotiate, that's fine. I do
In
feel
theory.
that there is a part of unionism that has really been co-opted into the democratic political establishment. And so, just a lot of people that I've known who have been in unions aren't particularly happy with them. They don't feel like they really help them, in their day to day as a worker. They don't end up with raises. If you get in trouble on the job, it is nice to have like a union representative, somebody there to, make sure that your boss just doesn't go off on you and fire you for one little mistake or anything like that. But generally speaking, I guess if I were to ask people how they feel about their unions, I get back something along the lines of, I pay in more than I get back.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I did watch some of the coverage of the railway union workers strike, and a lot of the, kind of the structure of that union, and then the points that some of the people were making did seem to be very fair to me. So I don't know. And I did, just to disclose, I watched the coverage through Jimmy Dore, who was, very biased towards the workers.
Yeah.
Not
As
that
he should
was
be.
wrong, or right. I'm
As
not
he
like
should be.
saying that or anything. I just,
Yeah.
want to disclose that, that is his bias.
Yes, for sure. And I 100% agree with him. But I completely agree with you on unions. I think that in theory, unions are great. Obviously, being able to come together collectively as workers and protect yourself and fight for better wages and better conditions and all of that is great in theory. But yes, the leadership of unions have completely been co-opted. It's very corrupt. And we saw that with the rail strike right before Christmas. The rank and file wanted something very different than union leadership. Union leadership sold them out. And that's something that we see on a regular basis. And so I think that it's probably going to reach a boiling point at some point, in particular in the rail industry. I think that this is something that's kind of going to reach one of those, there's going to be a point of no return, and there's going to be I think there's already a lot of infighting. But I think that at some point that's going to boil over, because this is now, we're messing with people's lives, with people's health, with people's safety. And I think that at some point it's going to boil over into not just the union rank and file, but the general public is going to start getting involved in that fight and supporting the rank and file, which should be the case anyways. Should have been the case before Christmas. But it's just not the way that it works. So, and that's intentional. I mean, there's a lot of effort put into keeping us from coming together on these issues. But yeah, I think that rank and file is definitely worlds away from union leadership on what they want and what they're willing to do to get it. And so hopefully this will be kind of a flash button point where there will be some movement and getting some safety regulations. I don't know, though. I have very little hope. I'm really very cynical at this point. The fact that we've seen 3 train derailments in the past, 3 weeks is not good. I think that they're going to continue. And it's just unfortunate that these companies, these corporations are able to literally buy our government and then rig the system in their favor and deregulate the process so that it's profit over people. And that's just the way that our country works.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I might phrase it a little bit differently to my libertarian audience, but I essentially agree with everything there, Misty, that, when you have the corporations by the government, they actually put in regulations and write them specifically to what they want, to make sure they don't have any competition, but also to let them cut as many costs as possible. So, there's a lot that goes into all of that. Now, you mentioned a little bit the Biden administration forcing the railway workers back to work. Can we talk about that a little bit? Because this happened in December, right? And I was kind of surprised and caught off guard. I assumed that if you got a Democrat Congress still, a Democrat president, that they would at least wait and have the Republicans, be the ones that are forcing the railway workers back to work. But it's a Democrat Congress that pushes this thing through, that ends up with the workers essentially having to accept a deal.
Yeah. Well, Democrats are Republicans at this point.
Okay.
That's really where we're at. I mean, it really started, years ago. Reagan, Clinton, really Bill Clinton really pushed the Democratic Party really into corporate hands, and it's only gotten worse since then. And so, yeah, I mean, I was completely unsurprised by the fact that, I mean, it's Joe Biden. He has 50 years of telling you exactly who he is, and that's who he is. He is a union busting corporatist. And so, yeah, it was really not. I wasn't surprised at all by Joe Biden. I was surprised that the quote unquote progressives didn't even attempt to pretend to fight, or stand up against it or make any waves whatsoever. I mean, I guess I wasn't really surprised, but it's just laughable at this point. They just every single time they cave to democratic establishment pressure, but they're going to change it from the inside, Kyle. They promise. It's ridiculous at this point, right? They're completely useless. And then I think that's why we're seeing now that they're not talking about this at all, because how can they? They literally just busted a strike. They just helped bust a strike on rail workers. And now something like this happens. And what are they supposed to do? What are they supposed to say? You look like a fool. You are responsible partly for this situation. So yeah, I mean, it's absurd, the situation. The Overton window in this country has pushed so far to the right, that legitimately Democrats are Republicans and Republicans are, I don't even know what they are anymore. But yeah, it's very funny to me because I hear some people on the right talk about how left the country. That's just absurd. And they'll try to say like Joe Biden's a socialist. I don't even have words for that. There's nothing socialist about Joe Biden. I just think that these words have been completely co-opted and bastardized. They don't mean anything anymore. They've just basically become insults that we fling at each other. Everybody I don't like is a Nazi. It's kind of that thing. If you're calling people like Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden a socialist, you've missed the plot. So yeah, I wasn't really all that surprised that Joe Biden did not stand for workers. He never has. Again, he's got 50 years in government where he has been telling people exactly who he is, and that is exactly who he is.
Right. So, yeah, I just wanted to say this because Reed Coverdale had a fantastic tweet about how the Biden administration is so invested in pretending Palestine doesn't exist. It's willing to ignore an environmental disaster in middle America.
I saw that.
But, I think that part of the reason, like the left and the right, like the whole idea that there's like this linear line, right, where the center is where all the radicals, where all the same people are, all the people that are, destroying our country is the radical center. It's Mitt Romney and Hillary Clinton. It's not, whoever they think are on the fringes that's destroying the country. Now, and this has created this really cool kind of phenomenon with Misty, where you have myself and you, libertarian and a leftist coming together. And this is happening a lot, including coming up in Washington, D.C. with the Rage Against the War Machine rally. I can't make it. I'm not sure if you're going, Misty, but
I am.
Oh, great. That's fantastic. Now, I know that part of one of their planks is about Julian Assange. So before we wrap up here, why don't you go ahead and say, anything you want about the Rage Against the War Machine rally, but also give us just a quick update on the show about where the Assange stuff is. It doesn't seem like legally his position has changed since we last talked.
No, not really. I'll start just by saying that I am very excited about seeing the Libertarian Party and the People's Party get together to organize this rally. You and I have been friends for a little while now, specifically because I made a conscious effort to step outside of my political bubble. I need allies for Assange, and I am literally willing to find those anywhere I can. And so I made a real conscious effort to seek out people who I thought would be, supporters. And in doing so, I've, become great friends with a lot of people that I probably wouldn't have been speaking to years ago. People like Scott Horton and yourself and Clint Russell and Reed Coverdale and Olivia Rondeau and a bunch of people who are amazing supporters of Julian Assange. And it's so easy. I don't even have to. It's like I'm mad at myself for not doing it sooner because there was no work involved. It was just like, yeah, we absolutely support Assange. And I'm like, hey, this is great. So it makes me really happy to see this kind of organizing across ideologies happening, because frankly, we disagree on stuff. That's fine. Like, we're grown-ups, right? Like, we can have those conversations, we can have those disagreements. And I think that it's good, it's healthy. But none of those disagreements or arguments really matter until we deal with the system, because we live in a political system where none of our opinions matter. It doesn't matter what you want. It doesn't matter what I want. It doesn't matter what economic policies we want, or none of that stuff matters, because they don't care what we say. So the idea that we can come together where we can find common cause and fight back, I think, is so unbelievably necessary. And it makes me really happy to see that happening. So yeah, Sunday, February 19th at 12:30 at the Lincoln Memorial. There's going to be speakers. There's lots of speakers, amazing speakers: Ron Paul, Tulsi Gabbard, Jimmy Dore, Max Blumenthal, Anya Parampil, Pasta Jardula, a whole host of people from all across the political spectrum. It's going to be really fantastic. And then there's going to be a march following that from the Lincoln Memorial to the White House, where they're going to deliver their list of demands. And as you mentioned, one of the demands is to free Julian Assange. And yeah, the case really isn't moving anywhere right now. We're still in the holding pattern of waiting for the High Court in the UK to decide whether or not they're going to hear the perfected grounds for appeal, which was essentially a Hail Mary pass. They had entered an appeal, a request for appeal, that was denied. So what they did is basically go back and do what's called a perfected grounds for appeal. And it was just basically going back and kind of reworking their points, their argument, and saying, hey, are you really sure that you don't want to hear this appeal? They're probably going to deny it, let's be honest. So there are a couple other legal options that they can go through. They can go to the European Court of Human Rights. I don't know. The legal team is kind of keeping the game plan close to the chest for obvious reasons. So I don't know what they're going to do. But if the perfected grounds for appeal is denied, he could be extradited literally any minute. So it's really just kind of, we're in a holding pattern. We're waiting to see what's going to happen. April 11th is the 4-year anniversary of him being essentially kidnapped from the Ecuadorian embassy. I'm going to be in DC on April 11th. We're going to hold an event. I think it's important for us to have a presence in DC on that day. I don't have specific details yet. We're still in the very early stages of planning it, but April 11th, for sure, mark your calendars. We will be in DC, probably outside the Department of Justice, because that makes the most sense. But we'll see. There's a couple other options of locations we could go to, the CIA being one of them. So yeah, we're really just in a holding pattern. We don't really have any new information. And this is kind of the whole point. The entire process has just been about dragging this out for as long as possible. Not only are they hoping to wear him down physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, I think it's also an effort to wear his supporters down. But we're not worn out. I mean, I am, but I'm not. You know what I mean? Like, I'm tired, but we aren't giving up. So, we just have to double down and just keep trying to build support. It's what we've been doing. It makes me super happy that the Rage Against the War Machine people added Julian Assange to their list of demands. That's awesome. So yeah, I'll be in DC. We're going to have an Assange table. We're going to be handing out information. We're going to be doing the whole bit. So if you guys can make it out to DC, if you're in the area, or you can go to I think it's rageagainstwar.com, I think. But they have different transportation options from a couple different cities in the area. I think they've got one from like Raleigh, North Carolina, maybe Boston, New York, a couple different places. So if you can't drive yourself or fly in, you might be able to find a bus situation. They're trying to get some buses lined up for people. I know a lot of people have carpooling, all of that good stuff, but we need we need to revitalize the anti-war movement in this country. It's so necessary. And there's been a lot of drama surrounding this rally. I really don't care about it. The drama is, it's not why I'm going. I don't care. I will stand with just about anybody to end the wars. I don't care who you are. So yeah, hopefully it's going to be a really great event, and I hope to see tons of people out there. I'm really excited for it.
All right, Misty, thank you so much. And
Yeah.
again, I'm glad you're doing the Rage Against the War Machine event. I'm sure, you'll help to bring people out, and anybody who's in the DC area or can make it. I know there's a couple other like sister events too.
Yeah.
The head of antiwar.com, Eric Garris, is actually speaking at the San Francisco event, so that's a pretty big deal. So, if you're way away from DC on the West Coast and you want to participate, head on out and get the details where that San Francisco event is and everything. But if you
there's a
can
bunch
make
of them
it,
too. There's one
yeah.
in Santa Cruz, Seattle. There's a bunch of
I think
sister
there's
events.
in
So
Portland, Maine is another New England one. So yeah.
Yeah, you can just go to the website and there's a tab for sister rallies. Just click on that, see if there's one near you if you can't make it to DC.
All right. Thank you, Misty.
Yeah, thanks guys.